Alright, time for another video. This is going to be part 2 of what I'm calling What is Base Reality? And in the first one we talked about the quantum level. What is matter made of? Since the god of the materialist and the atheist is matter, well, what is matter made of? And we found out that, well, they could say, guess what? Even though we know that, or at least we say that particles make up our molecules, which make up our atoms, which make up our planets and our stars and everything else in us, we don't really know what matter is made of. 24 lines of fluctuating forces, energy, and strings. What does that mean? We don't know. So literally, we don't know what makes up 100% of our universe. You can watch the first one if you'd like, and I'll put a link in the description below. Now, part 2, we continue our search. And we're looking at, well, what's the materialist savior for his paradigm? Okay, so without further ado, let's watch another video. And a young lady is interviewing a Nobel Prize winning, and she calls him a genius, Gerhard Hooft.
This is our second half of in-depth conversation with brilliant mind, complete genius, Nobel Prize winner, Professor Gerhard Hooft, talking about whether quantum mechanics and quantum physics is just a probability and more of an esoteric notion rather than a precise science.
It looks as if the whole universe was in its simplest possible form when everything got started, and all that needed to be done is someone to pull the switch, not literally, but well, metaphorically, and then the universe starts expanding. So where those equations come from and who pulled the switch, that is not the kind of question that science can answer. For instance, according to quantum mechanics, it looks as if our universe is actually only one of many universes. It looks as if there's a universe of universes. That's the way the equations are constructed. But it's wrong. I don't believe there are very many universes. I think there's just only one. All those others are universes that didn't materialize because the probability was they were just too improbable. They happened not to happen. Only one universe came out as the universe that we are in, and we can calculate the probability. If we would be able to do the calculation with infinite precision, that probability would be 1 and all other probabilities would be 0. But we can't calculate with infinite precision. Hopeless. We shouldn't even try. So we find this universe is the most likely universe from our perspective. Doesn't mean that any other universe exists or so, or that no other universe could exist, but there is only one.
Okay, so in the video, the Nobel Prize winning scientist Hooft makes a very startling admission. He believes that there's only one universe. Only one universe, not a multiverse. Well, why does he believe that? Because of, quote, probability. In other words, he's willing to use a little math. Unlike most atheists I know of, they hate to use math. Anyway, let's dig a little deeper. Now, Sir Fred Hoyle, we've run into him before. He was the one that coined the term Big Bang as a term of derision. He hated the Big Bang Theory, but later on in his career, he looked at the carbon atom, and this is what he said. Quote, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect, I'll say that again, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. No blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Well, if you haven't seen the first video of this series, you ought to watch it. Because what do we have? Well, let's see. Dark matter is makes up 25% of the universe, and it's an unknown force. And dark energy makes up 70% of the universe, and it's made up of an unknown force. It's even known less. They even know less about dark energy than they do about dark matter. And now come to find out, at the smallest level, at the quantum level, there are no such thing as particles either. They're nothing but blind forces. Isn't that interesting? So, Fred Hoyle, like I said, he came up with the term Big Bang as a term of derision. So, Mr. Atheist, but later he changed his mind. Had to, based on the evidence. So, Mr. Atheist Materialist, is your mind open to the actual evidence, or are you going to be closed-minded no matter what? Are you willing to look at the probability of there being another universe or not? Are you open or not? So, we're going to talk about the argument from fine-tuning of the universe. So, the universe either requires a fine-tuner or the atheists out, the materialists out, is what they call the multiverse. Okay? Now, what we're going to look at, just starting out, is only two of what they call the constants of nature that define our universe. And the first one we're going to look at is the gravitational constant. So without further ado, let's watch a short secular science video clip.
The gravitational constant, that's in this equation right here that every grade 12 high school student should learn. They take physics. The gravitational constant is finely tuned to at least 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. Some say even greater. I'm going to be real conservative here. 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. If we took a tape measure and we stretched it across the entire visible universe, okay, that's a big tape measure, across the entire visible universe, and it's in 1-inch increments, and one of the inches at one point, just one, is the life-permitting inch. Okay? If you go to the, which way are we going to go? If you increase the gravitational constant, just move it over 1 inch, the universe just collapses on itself. Big crunch. No universe. If you take it the other way, let's make the gravitational constant a little bit weaker. Let's just move 1 inch the other way. Then the universe blows apart and you never get galaxies and stars and planets.
All right, so in the video, the gravitational constant is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Even though the gravitational constant is not measured in inches, there was an analogy given in the video that if you were to stretch a tape measure across the entire known universe, which is 90 billion light years across, by the way, and you were to stretch a tape measure, put a mark anywhere on it, doesn't matter, but then if you were to move that mark 1 inch either way, we wouldn't be here. You put a mark on the tape measure, 90 billion light years across, and move it 1 inch either way, we wouldn't be here. If you increase the gravitational constant by even a little bit, 1 inch is the the stated scale, the universe would collapse in on itself. Or if you decrease it by a bit, the stars and galaxies could not form. So it's very finely tuned, and that's only 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Well, here's another one. The cosmological constant. So let's watch another short secular science video clip about that.
Our universe seems to be defined by a set of numbers which in some sense look special. If we had different numbers, we would end up with a sterile universe. People react to this seeming coincidence in a number of ways. You could say it's the outcome of some kind of design or providence. We could say it's a brute fact we have to accept, because these numbers might be determined by some theory which we haven't yet discovered.
For a while it was possible to believe that the laws of nature were not so precisely set as to require the hand of a creator. But then a completely new fundamental property of the universe was discovered. An anti-gravity force present in space itself. It is called the Cosmological Constant, and when cosmologists calculated its effect on the evolution of the universe, they realized it had to be very finely tuned indeed.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything is bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea. that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. Otherwise the universe would be so drastically different that it would be impossible for us to evolve. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question, but the alternative explanation was also impossible to contemplate.
Physicists did not want to accept the idea that the laws of nature might be controlled by well, the benevolence of nature. There should be no reason why the luck should just have it that we can exist. It's too much, it's a stretch. It's much too far to stretch.
It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer, a notion that even the anthropic scientists did not want to entertain. The scientists were between a rock and a hard place. Their own discoveries were pointing them towards an intelligent designer.
Physicists' dislike of mixing religion into physics. I think they were somewhat afraid that if it was admitted that the reason the world is the way it is has to do with our own existence, that could be hijacked by the creationists, by the intelligent designers.
So according to Leonard Susskind, the physicist Leonard Susskind, the cosmological constant is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. Well, that's 3 times greater than the gravitational constant. 3 times greater. Okay, so now we've just looked at 2 of the constants, but what I don't want you to do is overlook the fact that it takes 26, there are 26 different dimensionless constants that describe the universe. And you have to take them all into consideration, not just one. So many times when I debate atheists, we get stuck on one, like this. A protein molecule, a short protein molecule of only 150 amino acids. The chances of that coming about in Darwin's little pond by chance is only 1 chance into the 77th power. And then the atheist would go, well, you could do this, and this to mitigate it, etc. But wait a minute. When it comes to proteins, you need 42 million of them. And some of those proteins are up to 2,000 amino acids long. And therefore, the calculated probability of that happening is beyond comprehension. Beyond comprehension. Well, it goes the same way with these 26 dimensionless constants. You have to put them all together. And I don't want to use a simple term add, because when you add them exponentially. It's an exponential problem. It's not a matter of just 5 plus 5. No, it's an exponential problem that you have to add, which makes it astronomically unlikely that it would ever occur. That's the problem. And the Nobel Prize winning scientist, Hooft, is absolutely correct. So, here is an example of what secular scientists hope is true. They hope it's true, but I'm going to tell you something. I got news for you. This guy here in this quote, Eugene Koonin, is a very well-known origin of life scientist, and I hate to tell you this, but he just destroyed abiogenesis by this admission. I'll say that again. Eugene Koonin, a very well-known origin of life scientist, and if anybody ought to know what it would take to have the first life, it would be somebody like him. He just gave away abiogenesis. In his opinion, based upon the complexity of the first cell, and based on the complexity of the replication and translation system that would have to be in place in order for, not only is it important that you have the molecules that make up the cell, but you have to be able to divide that cell into two cells. And it would take an entire replication and translation system that is beyond your comprehension and mine. It is way beyond our comprehension. But what is his solution for it? Oh, the many worlds hypothesis, which is nothing more than a rehash of the multiverse, the cosmological model of eternal inflation. And it's interesting, eternal. Just keep that in mind for a minute. We'll talk about that again. So he's saying because if there is a multiverse, then the emergence of even highly complex systems by chance is not just possible, but inevitable. And that's another pet peeve, is the possibility versus probability. We'll talk about that in a minute. So what does this mean? Well, the materialist claim is, even though our universe is finely tuned for life, but they have a solution, and they say it's the multiverse. But according to Mr. Hoft and the fine-tuning of the universe and 26 constants, the probability of a universe that can support life is so unlikely, as Hoff said, we only have one universe. Are other universes possible? He admits that it's possible, but because of the probability, it isn't going to happen. In fact, it's just like what Brian Cox said in another video I did when he was talking about sandcastles. A sandcastle cannot be made by Mother Nature because there are trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of other ways that a sand pile would be the likely outcome. Therefore, a sand castle, if you go down to the beach and you see one, you know without any shadow of doubt that somebody did that. An agency did that. It didn't happen by chance alone. It's the same with these constants. And Leonard Susskind said, guess what? To believe that the cosmological constant itself, which is the expansion rate of the universe, which really is, quote, dark energy, it represents all those things now, the likelihood of that happening by chance is not a reasonable idea. It is not reasonable. Just that one probability and that one constant. But of course, like I said, you can't stop there with the one constant. You have to actually exponentially include all the constants. And when you add just the two we mentioned, it is beyond comprehension that it would happen by chance. That's what we're talking about. So get this. Please get this. You have to understand this from Hoff's perspective. The fine-tuning of our universe that does allow life to exist makes the likelihood of a multiverse, at least a multiverse that would allow for life to be non-existent. And ironically, guess what? The exact same reason a multiverse is proposed is the exact same reason a multiverse is not a reasonable option. Let me say that again. The exact same reason secular, atheistic, materialistic scientists bring up the possibility and that they want there to be a multiverse is the exact same reason a multiverse is not a reasonable option. The probability of getting a universe that can support life is nil by chance alone. And that's what we're talking about here, folks. We're talking about by chance alone. But as a theist, I don't have that problem. God can churn out as many universes as he desires. Let's say that again. Since God is doing it, they must be designed, and he can set the parameters, the 26 parameters, at anything he wants, and he can churn out as many universes as he wants. The point is, the God of atheism, chance is not a reasonable choice. It is not a reasonable choice. In other words, science and mathematics is telling us that a multiverse is not science in 2022. And I have videos that I'll put in the link in the description below that bear this out. In fact, even if there were a multiverse, even Alan Guth admits, and I'll put that in the description below too, admits that the multiverse itself would have to have an ultimate beginning. And logic alone, and I only have to do this by logic alone. I don't have to do this by anything else. Logic alone. In order for there to be anything at all to exist, there has to be in the past, somewhere in the past, the uncaused first cause, the prime mover. They've been debating this for centuries. But that cause cannot be material. Why? Because it brought the material into existence. It is outside space, time, energy, etc. It's outside of it to bring it all into existence. And once again, the multiverse, first of all, if there is a multiverse, requires an ultimate beginning, which would require an ultimate beginner. And even if you were to then, in our day, even if you were then to find out there are other universes, which we don't know there is, in fact, again in 2022, and I'll leave videos in the description below that say it is not science in 2022 to believe that. So our base reality is, guess what? That only one universe exists. And if that's the truth, which it seems like it is, based on probability, just like a sandcastle doesn't show up by itself, other universes don't show up by themselves, and the multiverse doesn't show up by itself, chance is not a reasonable idea anymore. The other thing that gets me too, and here's my last point, eternity. Well, we've talked about before in the past the steady state theory. That steady state theory said, well, the universe has always existed. Carl Sagan says the cosmos has always existed. Eternal inflation says that there are multiverses out there, they're continually being created. It's eternal inflation, the eternal inflation theory. Well, guess what? I really find this fascinating, that the atheist in 2022 has no problem with eternity as long as it only involves some type of physical matter. But wait a minute, we just learned in the previous video that matter doesn't exist, and we learned in this video that the multiverse had a beginning. What does that mean? And oh, guess what? There's only one universe today, according to Hoft. So that means if there is only one universe, then the possibility of abiogenesis ever happening, it never happened. Abiogenesis never happened in this universe by chance. It never did. There's only one universe. Again, the probability of it happening by chance in this universe is so nil as to make it non-existent. It didn't happen. So even though Eugene Koonin wanted to use the multiverse excuse to negate his problem, in actuality, he did just the opposite. That's an admission. That's an indirect admission that abiogenesis cannot occur in this universe. The replication and translation system, which is, again, so sophisticated, beyond our comprehension, that would allow the first cell to divide, is a system beyond our comprehension, requiring 400 million lines of computer code to do it, and it doesn't exist. Anyway, it's an admission that the fine-tuning of the universe makes one universe, only one universe, with life possible. Therefore, abiogenesis did not happen without the help of a designer. It's never been a better time to be a believer in Jesus and study science. Have a blessed day. Thanks. Bye.